this word genocide is getting thrown around in a pretty inappropriate way by lots of different folks. Israel is not trying to wipe the Palestinian people off the map.
זכור את אשר עשה לך עמלק, נצטווינו. אנו זוכרים ואנו נלחמים.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
Israel's not trying to wipe Gaza off the map.
אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
עזה לא תחזור להיות מה שהייתה וחמאס לא יהיה. חסל את הכל.
תשמיד את עזה עכשיו, עכשיו. עזה הופכת לדרזדן, כן.
Israel's trying to defend itself against a genocidal terrorist threat. So if we're going to start using that word, fine, let's use it appropriately.
Heinous acts and the atrocities they committed against Israeli civilians. But why is it so hard for him to do the same in regard to the slaughter of innocent Palestinian civilians? Why is he so willing to keep referencing what Hamas has said in the past over and over again, while completely ignoring a statement from the defense minister of Israel? Gaza won't return to what it was before. We will eliminate everything. But I'm not done yet. Then you have Reservist Major General Giora Eiland, who's also the former head of the Israeli National Security Council. Here's a statement from Giora. The state of Israel had no choice but to turn Gaza into a place that is temporarily or permanently impossible to live in. Creating a severe humanitarian crisis in Gaza is a necessary means to achieve the goal. I don't know, do we think Eiland is a liar? Or should we take what Eiland has to say at face value? Seems pretty damn clear to me. There's more. Gaza will become a place where no human being can exist. Do you guys need more evidence? Is it hurting the Israeli government's feelings for me to call them genocidal because what they're engaging in is genocidal rhetoric and actions? Maybe they should reconsider their military behavior. Maybe they should reconsider the slaughter and indiscriminate bombing of Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip. Maybe if they did that, people wouldn't be using this kind of rhetoric to criticize what they're engaging in. And to be sure, I will continue using this rhetoric because it's the appropriate rhetoric. It is fact-based rhetoric that I'm literally providing evidence for as we speak, but I'm going to continue providing even more evidence since apparently you need to build a mountain of evidence to prove your case here. But I just want you all to consider, what would you think if the shoe were on the other foot? If Hamas had the military capability and the kind of backing that the Israeli government currently has, and they carried out these atrocities against innocent Israeli civilians, would anyone in the US State Department hesitate to call it a genocide? I would argue that they wouldn't hesitate. But I've got more. Knesset member and former public diplomacy minister Galit Distal Atbarian posted on Facebook that Israeli officials must invest all their energy in one thing: erasing all of Gaza from the face of the earth. Let me read that again, okay? Israeli officials must invest all their energy in one thing: erasing all of Gaza from the face of the earth. I mean, how many different politicians did we hear from again? I mean, that's quite a few, no? But there's more. That the brave monsters will fly to the southern fence and enter Egyptian territory Atbarian continued, an apparent reference to Israel's reported plan to permanently expel Palestinians who survived the assault to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, imposing a second Nakba on the population. Or let them die. Gaza needs to be wiped out. Sounds like genocidal rhetoric to me. What does genocide mean to you? Exactly. There's more. This is also from Galit. Revengeful and vicious IDF is required here. Anything less than that is immoral. No, you would think that's enough, but I'm not done yet. There's more. Let me give you more examples. This was reported in the New York Times. Some Israeli hardliners advocate keeping control of Gaza and permanently expelling its Palestinian residents. A Likud lawmaker, Ariel Kalner, has called for another Nakba that would overshadow the original mass displacement in 1948. Right now, one goal, Nakba, Kalner said on October 8th, Nakba in Gaza and Nakba to anyone who dares to join, he added. And a far-right government minister, Amichai Eliyahu, said on Wednesday, this is an older excerpt, so it wasn't literally this past Wednesday, this was earlier, but nonetheless, that Gazan land should be given to former Israeli soldiers who fought in Gaza or to former Israeli settlers who lived in the enclave before Israel withdrew from it in 2005. Then Eliyahu said that Israel should consider dropping a nuclear bomb on Gaza, an idea that drew condemnation from Netanyahu and other members of the government. Now, Eliyahu was temporarily suspended for the nuclear bombing statement. But as far as I know, that is the only politician, only public figure in Israel who has used genocidal rhetoric and has been punished for it. All those other people are free to say these things, continue to say these things, appear on Israeli television on a regular basis and say these types of things. But here in America, we get a completely different story. You know, I have to buy a subscription to the Financial Times to read real reporting about what's really being said by Israeli officials. Because some of the most heinous statements, to be quite frank, are not being repeated or shared in the New York Times. But I do have more evidence, more examples. Politico reported just today that the United States has sent Israel data on aid group locations in Gaza so that the IDF can avoid bombing them. Okay, the point is, hey, we're sharing intel with you. This is a UN building. This is where innocent civilians are sheltering. This is a hospital. Please don't bomb these buildings, considering the high volume of Palestinian civilians who are sheltering there. They bombed anyway. But I mean, why wouldn't they? There's no consequences. It's not like the United States punished them or served up consequences for ignoring that intel and deciding to bomb where civilians were sheltering. So of course they're going to do it. The Biden administration has been providing Israel with the location of humanitarian groups in Gaza for weeks to prevent strikes against their facilities, but Israel has continued to hit such sites. Politico also reports officials have helped transmit coordinates of groups that provide food and medical care in Gaza and operate out of hospitals, smaller offices, and live in guest houses. Among the sites provided to the Israeli government are medical facilities, including Al-Shifa Hospital, parts of which Israeli forces took over on November 15th. We all know what happened to Al-Shifa Hospital. We're still waiting on evidence that under the Al-Shifa Hospital was a Hamas militant command center. Where's the evidence of that? The IDF has failed to provide it, and they've moved on to bombing other hospitals. Again, with absolutely no consequences from the United States government or State Department. And the information, by the way, included GPS coordinates of a number of medical facilities and information on movements of these aid groups. But Israel's continued bombardment of these humanitarian facilities raises more questions about whether Washington has the political sway many in the administration want with Israel. And the divide is particularly stark given that the goal is protecting aid workers, one of the most fundamental tenets of international humanitarian law. And as we know, at least 53 journalists have been killed as a result of the IDF's aerial bombardment, not just in the Gaza Strip. There were journalists who died in Lebanon as well. And perhaps all these actions and all these statements that have been very clear to me in terms of the intentions and the actions of the IDF and the Israeli government, maybe that's not enough for you. Maybe you have to hear from someone who isn't just a dumb talk show host, right? I'm just a dumb talk show host. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just relaying the information. I'm sharing with you the details of what they're doing and saying, but maybe that's not good enough. So why don't we actually read from an Israeli historian and genocide expert who wrote this piece in Jewish Currents. His name is Raz Segal. The title is A Textbook Case of Genocide. Israel has been explicit about what it's carrying out in Gaza. Why isn't the world listening? And notice the date for the piece. It's dated October 13th. So it's less than a week after Hamas's atrocities. So a lot of the bloodshed that we've been sharing with you in recent weeks hadn't even happened yet. But Raz Segal, with a sober eye, looked at what was going on and what the Israeli government was planning to do in Gaza, and he was already raising alarm over it. So let's give you a few excerpts. The assault on Gaza can also be understood in other terms, as a textbook case of genocide unfolding in front of our eyes. I say this as a scholar of genocide who has spent many years writing about Israeli mass violence against Palestinians. Under international law, the crime of genocide is defined by the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, as noted in the December 1948 UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. In its murderous attack on Gaza, Israel has loudly proclaimed this intent. And they have. I've shared examples of that with you. He then turns to how the media in Israel is commenting on Palestinians and what they think should happen to Gaza. An interviewee on the pro-Netanyahu Channel 14 called for Israel to turn Gaza to Dresden. Channel 12, Israel's most watched news station, published a report about left-wing Israelis or left-leaning Israelis calling to dance on what used to be Gaza. Meanwhile, genocidal verbs, calls to erase and flatten Gaza, have become omnipresent on Israeli social media. In Tel Aviv, a banner reading "Zero Gazans" was seen hanging from a bridge. Remember how disgusted we all were when we saw anti-Semitic banners hanging from freeway bridges in the United States during that whole debacle involving Kanye West spreading anti-Semitic garbage? Remember how horrific that was, how much we hated it? Why is it okay for those types of banners to be, put up on bridges in regard to Palestinian civilians? Why the double standard? So look, John Kirby and the White House's genocide denialism might seem super shocking for those who are taking a sober look at all of this. But I really do want you to look at the history of the United States, because historically speaking, the US has spent a lot of time engaging in genocide denial, not just when it comes to this war, but for over a century, the United States wouldn't even recognize the Armenian genocide. And what's so ironic about all of this is that it took the Biden administration, Joe Biden himself, to acknowledge the Armenian genocide. And he deserves a lot of credit for that. It would have been far better, though, if he didn't engage in denialism when it comes to what is currently transpiring against Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip. And I want to share one final thing with you, because here's the thing. It would be really embarrassing, and it would be terrible optically speaking, if the Biden administration admitted that what's currently taking place is genocide, while also engaging in some of the backroom deals that are happening behind the scenes. What am I talking about? Well, Haaretz reported this. US President Joe Biden's energy security advisor is visiting Israel to discuss potential economic revitalization plans for Gaza centered around undeveloped offshore natural gas fields. There it is. This is exactly what Naomi Klein wrote about in The Shock Doctrine, which, if you haven't read, I highly, highly, highly recommend you do. This is disaster capitalism in a nutshell. This is an opportunity. Seize the day. one people's loss can be our treasure. And it's absolutely disgusting and sick, but I have to say I'm not surprised. It's really incumbent on us to expect more from our government, to hold them accountable when on one hand, they talk about the lack of humanitarianism in other countries, the brutalization of Muslims in countries like China, but then they turn around and greenlight the brutalization of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and to be quite frank, the West Bank as well. That's been ongoing. This is the reality of the situation. It sucks and it's sick that our government lies to us.